Welcome to our channel. This is Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab, and along with my husband Chris, we do thrift flips. We take unwanted, unloved, outdated thrift store finds and then we give them new life. And on our channel, we share the process with you all. So I was super excited in my thrifting hauls to come across animals like this. They are outdated, they are unwanted, they are unloved. So I am so ready to give them a new look. And I definitely know these are definitely those type of fake little wooden book items that you definitely see in a thrift store. Though the sets of them were probably 3 different sizes, I setted them so they were all the same size. And I'm super excited to flip these. I feel like the same thing. These are those odds and ends, those thrift store finds. This is why I love sharing thrift flips with you, because I feel like these are general items that you would find out in a thrift store. Just sharing each other ideas of what we would do with these type of items is what our channel is all about. For me, when I'm looking for Crocs like this that I want to upcycle and paint the outside, I don't want to have to paint the inside. So I'm looking for something that is good shape, something that will coordinate with my colors, like the black, the white. I know that they are dirty, but this is the beginning of the video. So I want them to be in good shape. So yep, I'm a little picky when I'm looking for these kind of Crocs. So the same thing with this canister set. I wanted to make sure that that inside is good, it's a coordinating color to what I like, and that the seals are still nice and tight. I want people to be able to use these pieces not just because they're pretty and they're decor, but that they are actually useful. And as you see, as I'm struggling trying to get this lid off one-handed, that is a nice tight seal. So these two fall in this type of grouping. When I'm flipping items, I group items together that are similar into what I'm going to be doing to them. These type of items are an easy clean. Just some hot water, some Dawn dish soap, let them soak, the stickers fall right off, and then let them dry. I want to add a little bit of age to this canvas. So all it is the K-cups left over for me and Chris's morning coffee and some hot water, and then I just put that in, making sure that it's immersed and taking it off the hot water and then letting it cool all the way before removing it. So after getting these little books cleaned and letting them dry, they are ready for some paint. And I'm just using the Rust-Oleum paint and primer, and yes, it is good on wood. And the reason for doing this instead of using a can of paint and a paintbrush is just for time. Instead of flipping them back and forth and brushing them, it's just the ease of being able to stand them up this way and giving them a nice coat of the black spray paint that will cover them up quickly. Now, if you are new to our channel, we are blessed to, when we built our workshop not even a year ago, thank God to Ginger Chick that helped us afford to build this, that we have a spray room that was an old shed that we thought in the design of being able to attach it to the pole barn workshop. So as you see here, we can spray all year long. Michigan weather doesn't always allow you to do that, so this is a blessing. But if you are new to flipping and you are out thrifting, oh my gosh, please look for a turntable. The one that we use in our spray room was actually for a TV, but even those little plastic ones, when you're out thrifting, definitely helps you get your items covered, get that 360 of spray around. You don't have to accidentally touch the paint. We just have extra boards that we had cut up to get these items so I can carry them off to tables and let them sit, and then being able to have a well-ventilated area and to be able to get multiple items done at the same time. So I'm going to be undercoating all these little animals with the same paint, that Rust-Oleum paint and primer in one. And this black spray paint goes a long way. I don't even think I'll be using one can if I open a second can. So a little bit goes a long way. In our area, they're about $3.80 a can, so I believe that it is cost efficient. Just time spent of being able to get in all these little crevices and getting them sprayed. Just for us, that helps with the cost, because then you're not spending so much time on it. And also, we like to get these undercoated with black. We like to distress the items. We like to even out the porosity of these items, cover up all that original color, make sure that we have a good base to start off painting all these little animals. I'm going to be using the same, that Rust-Oleum paint and primer in that flat black. It is just a nice base color. I know that it's going to adhere to these Crocs, and it's going to give something for my other paint to adhere to. And yes, the struggle's real. I always like to share this because I know it has to happen to other people. And yep, I do thrift hockey pucks also to help keep my items up, but nope, they don't always stay up. Now, when it comes to spraying these kind of containers that I want to keep that inside safe, I don't want to paint the inside, I have the leftover pieces of contact paper that I put in furniture drawers, or just that Duck Brand clear that I always have on hand for transfer tape. I just like to protect that. You could use masking tape, but that'd be a lot of masking tape, so just keep your pieces apart. I guess you could use dollar store contact paper too. I just want something to protect the inside, because spray paint is just like water, and especially in the air, it will find its way underneath there. Now for the lid is a different color than the inside, and I don't even think that it is sealed properly. So I'm going to go ahead and spray paint both sides of this and just keep that underneath of that lid black. So my go-to is usually polycrylic, but I know polycrylic is not easy for everybody to find in a spray. The splatter issue of how to store the can is also a nightmare sometimes. So I have been using this Rust-Oleum clear coat in matte and been giving it a try. So yep, that is what we're going to try today. It is half the price of that polycrylic, so let's hope and pray that this works just like the polycrylic for that in-between to seal this black in. So now that that Rust-Oleum clear coat is dry, I can flip the items over and proceed to repeat the same process for any items that were not fully covered. So now that these are all painted up with their black, they're all sealed in with the Rust-Oleum clear coat, I'm going to let them sit, I'm going to let them dry good overnight before going on to the next step. So if you're wondering where these canisters sat when I was spray painting them, I'm actually going to be trying something a little bit different than I've ever tried before. Now, even though that big canister did not come with the set, by the time I finish, I'm going to be making a set. And yep, I'm going to be using some of this air dry clay today. Now, I ordered this off of Amazon. None of my local hobby stores had any, so I'm just guesstimated. I've watched a few YouTubers using this in the IOD molds. I thought I'm not even anywhere there yet, so let me just do something simple. So I'm just starting right off. I know there's multiple ways that you can do it, and let's see how this works for me. So I'm just cutting off a chunk of this air dry clay. I'm working it with my hands. Yep, they have spray paint on it, and this is just how it works. I'm sure that it's not going to be coming off in this clay. And so I'm just trying to flatten it out because I'm going to be stamping some letters that I had ordered off of Amazon to make words for these canisters. And yep, I stole one of my little rolling pins from my decor. And these spatulas are something that I had thrifted. I think they came with some paint brushes that, like, yep, I thrifted them. And then especially even this metal yardstick, I thrifted that too. I tell you the things that you can thrift. So I ordered these sets off of Amazon. I just wanted some basic letters, something that wasn't too big. So I did make myself a straight edge, just cutting off that bottom of that clay. And if you order these from Amazon, yep, you got to cut them apart yourself. I did not know that, so I took it off camera, cut them all apart, and now I just rolled out that clay to the thickness I thought was workable to be able to attach it to those canisters, and now I'm just butting the letters right up with each other. Since this is my first time using the air dry clay, my first time putting stamps in the air dry clay, that's why I chose these letters. I like that they were little blocks. I like that they were square, so that way my perfectionist as me could line them up. I don't care if they're a little imperfectly, that the squares that are around the letters get into the clay. I think it gives that homemade look. So I'm just here pushing them into the clay, making sure that they are into the clay, that the letter's in there, and I'm just doing the word flower first. Now I want to make another straight edge. That's why I left those letters in the clay while I'm cutting around them. I just want to totally cut that into a straight line using this metal as my straight edge, the little spackling tool to help me cut it. And then since the sides aren't as long, I can just go along with that little tool again and just cut down that stamp, keeping it as straight as I can. And then hoarding that air dry clay. I'm not really sure how long it takes to dry it out. I can feel the moisture on that, so I'm putting it back in that package. Now this was a little bit tricky. I was trying to keep this square, but I also needed to lift it up. And I've heard people say something about using like saran wrap, but I once I got it started, I was able to move it. So I did not use saran wrap on this project. But just a note to self, if you want to lift up a little bit easier, you could use saran wrap. So then as you see, I just removed the letters, the little stamping letters now, and now I'm going to place it on my canister for it to dry. And I should have brought my lint rollers, but they're in my house, not in my workshop. So what I need now is to let this air dry clay set up into the shape of the canister. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm making sure that all those edges are nice and smooth from where I cut it, and that I can let it dry on the canister. You want to let them dry before gluing them on. So me personally, I love the little indentations that each individual stamp made around the letter. So now I'm moving on to the word sugar. Now this is just one of the Cricut mats that I use that has the measurements on the back. That way I can keep this nice and level using that metal or something as a straight edge. You don't have to use a metal yardstick by any means, just something to keep that this is nice and straight. And then attaching my letters one by one. When I'm rolling it out, I'm eyeballing, I put the letters out so I know how wide I need to make my clay. So the same thing, using that straight edge to cut that around the stamps, not moving out those little letters until I get all this clay cut. So this little spatula is really very thin, so it is definitely helping me easily lift this off of the board. I leave my stamps there, that way if it does stretch or shift the clay a little bit, I can fix it after I have lifted it. And then the exact same thing, I'm going to do that again. It's not so much about centering it as it is getting that round shape for that air dry clay to dry. And so I'm just making sure that it's keeping that square shape as straight as I can. It's going to be that perfectly imperfect because it's going to be sort of like a pottery piece where it's handmade. Repeated the same process for the tea canister also. So I needed to use 2 S's when it came to the utensils. So I made sure that for squareness, I kept the one at the end and removing the one in the middle to cut it out. I let these completely dry overnight. They seemed to turn color, so that I knew that they were dry. So now I'm just making sure that they are all even before gluing them, just measuring what was pleasing to my eye, the spacing that I wanted to. And then I'm using Gorilla Glue in the clear. I've seen a lot of people doing that with the IOD stamps molding that they are attaching to canisters. So if it's working for them, then I'm going to give it a try too. For these Crocs, I want to make them a croc color. So I'm going in with this Waverly Mineral Paint that's kind of that grayish tan color, and I'm going to be making some texture paint using baking soda, so it's a half and half mixture. So while I'm still putting that texture paint on, I'm not removing that contact paper. I don't want to get this inside that crock. And I have decided that for me, I like going in this kind of a motion, going around the canisters. And I have them on the same board, and I do have one of those cheap Lazy Susan turntables underneath this board so that I can turn and work on that 360 of the crock easily. And so when it comes to the bottom of the crock, there's kind of a little lip, so I'm going to have a stopping point and leaving a little bit of that center black. The same thing with this one. I'm going to be working around, starting at the bottom first, not removing that contact paper to protect that inside, and going in this kind of around the crock motion. So when it came to this little board, I just taped off where that ceramic tile was, so I'm just painting that board. I can go in and clean it up if it gets into any of the crevices, but I just wanted to make sure that I taped it off to keep it off of that wood. So as I'm painting this little jug, my original intention was to paint the whole thing with this paint. But as I'm just painting it along, I'm like, you know what? There's a stopping point. That top would look very nice black. It takes it a while for my mind to click on this, but sometimes an item just tells you how it wants to be painted. What your original thought gets changed in the process when you're actually doing it. Since I sealed in that paint with that clear coat, it is very easy to clean off this chalk paint before it is set up. Now I grabbed this little terracotta pot from my hoards. I have quite a hoard of terracotta pots in my gardening shed. Now terracotta just soaks this right in. I did not feel the need to pre-paint this black at all. I like some of that terracotta to show through. And my original thought for this piece was to put it inside that little number 2 canvas basket that I'm coffee dyeing. I'm just going back in with this little fan brush. There's a little bit of a lip on the bottom of it. This is just a great stopping point. When it comes to painting up these little animals, I did that same baking soda texture paint, but I did it with the Elephant Waverly chalk paint. And now I'm just going in and painting these cute little animals to give them a whole new look. So kind of like that jug, when I started painting on this sheep, I'm like, you know, I think that I can get all her little wool painted all up. There's a texture to it. And then the legs and the little ears and the little cute little mouth and face are a different texture. And if I can go in very gingerly, even though I have this in a little bit faster forward, I can just leave those out and leaving that black. It's already finished off because it has a clear coat on it. So if I do get any on, I can just wipe it off. For this pig, oh my goodness, there is a lot of texture to this pig. So I switched over to a little bit heavier of a chalk paintbrush. I don't have a lot of these in my hoard, and I have realized like, oh, I think I'm going to have to get myself a lot more of these brushes. But, you know, I can wash it out in between if I need to use it on a different color. So I'm just going in with that brush to get the most surface area, and then I need a smaller brush to go into the little crevices, the little pieces and parts around his ear and hooves where his legs are together, and his cute little swirly tail. Now, even though there was a ton of texture on this little rabbit, that chalk painting brush was just too massive to paint this little bunny. When it came to painting this cookie jar, I did not want to use a texture paint. I just am going to go in with some Waverly chalk paint. My hope is to distress the letters, to have those letters show through at the end. So that's why I sealed that in. If you don't seal in your black paint and then you choose to do white, a lot of times you will get a gray mess. The chalk paint and the black paint will become one and make gray. So that is another one of those little tips of why we seal that paint in before moving on to especially white. I will say after today I am going to be ordering some more brushes. Apparently when I'm doing multiple colors, which I know black, gray, and white, is that really multiple colors? Sure it is. So for us it is that I do not have enough of these chalk paint brushes. So the ease of spray painting these little books black, I want to leave that detail of what would be the pages. So I am going to go in and hand paint every single one of these little books using that same chalk paint because I have it out. So now that Gorilla Glue is set up, or I'm praying that it is, I gave it a few hours. I wasn't really sure. It said it was a quick dry. So I'm going in and spray painting these black. I sealed that inside off with those contact paper, taped that contact paper down. It was at the bottom of the roll, so the contact paper itself was a little rolly. So if you're wondering why does she have that masking tape down, that was because it kept wanting to roll up on me. So control issues, I wanted it to stay down, so I taped it down. So I'm going in with that Rust-Oleum paint and primer in the flat black and getting these all painted up with a base color of black. Oh, the round robin game of flipping items when you're a reseller to get multiple items done. Because paint is always drying. Something is always dried and ready to be worked on, and something's drying and waiting to be worked on. So now I'm on to my second coat of my mineral paint. And for this, I did add a little bit more water to make it a little bit smoother on that second, so it glided on a little easier, but not enough water that it was going to take off the original coat that I put on. So for this cookie jar, I will say that if I would have had a bigger brush, I think I could have got it covered in less coats, but this bad boy ended up taking me 4 coats to get it completely covered. When it came to this elephant gray color in the textured paint, I have to say that it covered wonderful with 1 coat. So now I'm just flipping the item over, getting any areas that did not get covered up. That Rust-Oleum black paint is dry, I'm going in with Polycrylic because I'm testing out that Rust-Oleum is an in-between, and I spent a lot of time at making these air dry clay molds for these canister sets, so I'm going for the for sure thing for this round. After that, Polycrylic is good and dry. For this canister set, I am going to be doing a texture paint. I noticed that there's a little bit of a lip where you can see down behind the air dry clay mold that I had put on there. I didn't want to blend it in. I wanted it to stay that kind of a chunky line. So I know mixing this texture paint, I'll be able to kind of tuck it in there and fill in that gap. So it's that Waverly white chalk paint in half, and then half the baking soda. The ease of actually getting to be able to push it into where I needed to fill any of those gaps, I did pick it off that contact paper, trying to keep it away from the edge, and then when I set it back down, I can go around it a little bit better, but I wanted to lift it up to make sure that I was filling in, especially trying to go up from underneath. There's a nice lip on the bottom of this canister set, so I'm going to use that as my stopping point, just going in with that fan brush to go in very carefully, very gingerly, and touch those edges. And just the way that this canister set is made, I went in and did those edges, but I still needed to go back in and blend the 2 features together. So the lids don't have a great stopping point when it came to the little knobs on the top, so I'm just going to have to eyeball it and pray for the best that I can make it as clean of a line as I can. I'm using that fan brush. I'm not going to go underneath because this is where there is that rubber seal that I have removed, so I'm going to leave the black color, making sure that I had gotten sprayed. I did not spray the inside of these either, but I'm just going around the outer edge. I want to leave that black feature of that little knob. So as I'm doing this canister set, I'm thinking to myself, I should have textured painted that cookie jar because this is definitely covering in 2 coats. So I'm going in and making sure that I have some very smooth texture on this canister set. And as you see, I'm not going to be putting texture paint on the air dry clay part. I'm going to go back in with the regular. That's why I have left it out. But I'm trying to get all these bumps out, anything that's not as smooth as I want it, to make sure that it's all going in the same direction. I just to me it manages it as kind of a pottery piece now with this texture paint on it. So now I'm going in with a very tiny brush, some of that just plain Waverly white chalk paint, and I'm going in and I want to keep the letters. You can kind of see that flower in the background of this picture, but I'm just going in hoping for a very steady hand. There's a little bit of texture on the edge, but I don't care. I'm going to leave that texture right where it is. This is a handmade piece, so I'm just going to go in and trace around the letters Luckily, I sealed this in with some clear coat, so it will be able to wipe off if I don't. And then I actually have another clean little brush as if I actually get into the letters that I can immediately go in and take any paint off. This is, I know this is a little bit tedious, but this is that love of flipping, the love of doing what you do of flipping items. So now I'm going in with this Waverly wax. This is the white wax. I know it looks yellow when it pours out. I don't know why. So I'm just going, I did wash that brush out and now I'm using it to do the whitewash to give these more of a cement look. Just putting a nice generous coat on them and then I will be wiping it off. And that wax just really grabs into that texture paint, any of the detail features on these little animals and just makes them pop. So the same thing on this bunny, going in with that bigger brush. I did have to go in with a smaller brush when it came to any little crevices, just putting that on and then wiping it off and letting it sit wherever it wanted to sit. And I will say, since this is a chalk paint, as I'm rubbing on it, it did go down to that black. So painting that pre-surface black was a great idea in my mind, so that way you know what color you want that's showing through. I don't know if y'all think I'm crazy, but when it comes to texture paint, I love the texture, but I don't like the sandpaper feel of it. So I actually take a 220 sandpaper and just take out any high bumps on any of these painted texture, just enough that it's textured, but it's not so textured that it feels like sandpaper. So now I'm going in using that same Waverly wax and the white, using that waxing chalk paint brush to get it into that texture paint. I'm just wiping it on, and then once I get a little bit of a surface area, I'll go back in with a piece of drop cloth and take any excess off, rubbing it a little bit. So remember, it's a chalk paint, and if you rub really hard, you might get down to that original black, but I'm just trying to keep that white on there. If I got any of that wax on this black top, I'm just going back in with a wet wipe and cleaning it off. So when it came to these type of cracks where that texture paint is, I'm going in and making sure I want it to be smooth. If it goes down to the white, it's okay. This is a handmade product. You know that this is something I've painted myself. If you're in my retail booth, it's a craft side. So I'm just going in and making sure that there's not any sharpness to the top of the lip of this crock. So my original plan for this cookie jar was to take a wet wipe and go back and distress the letters to have the letters show through. But since this ended up taking me 4 coats and the ceramic, I think, soaked this right in, even though I sealed that in with an in-between coat, I could not get it to rub off. So I started with the wet wipe, and then I tried a little bit of sandpaper, which was scuffing it up too much. So yep, just because you start off with a plan doesn't always mean it's what you get to do to an item. So I scrapped that idea, dried it off, and then recoated it with some white paint. So I wanted to make sure that I distressed the edges of these little books just a little bit, not so much as the front as the sides that you'll see, just to give it a little bit of texture. I painted that underneath black, so I want to see a little bit of it. Then of course running it over the entire book to make sure that it's nice and smooth. So even though I went back through and tried to make this texture paint as smooth as I can so there wasn't any lumps and bumps, I'm still going over, when I'm sanding these pieces, this texture paint, I just have a really light hand. I'm just grabbing any high spots. Now I don't want to get rid of the texture, I just want to get rid of that. It's a coarse sandpaper feel. And then I know I'm repeating myself here, but I'm still going around that top lip, making sure that there's not any sharp points, anything that's going to be weared off with the lid going on and off. So I absolutely love how I was able to trace around with paint those letters. I love how these black letters pop, but there's a lot of texture going on, and my original plan anyway was to go around and distress just where I had air dried, and then showing off some of that detail where the letters had pressed in, just using a little wet wipe. Now that I have the canister set the way that I want, the texture smooth as I want, I have my letters distressed the way that I want them, I'm going in with a couple coats of this Rust-Oleum and clear coat and matte and making sure that it's good and sealed in. This is going to be a kitchen piece. Yes, it could just be for decor, but I'm selling it as hopefully somebody will be using it in their kitchen. Then I'm also using that same clear coat to seal these books, and these books were painted with a chalk paint. Chalk paint will constantly come off if you do not seal it in with something. And because I have one more step on these pieces, I'm not going to be waxing them in because the wax will prevent me from doing what the next detail and I want to do on them. So I don't know how many of you watched my riser makeover flip from Thrifted Items video, but I had done a red cake stand and I had actually painted it with the mineral and then I antiqued waxed it. And I felt like I was one step away from original crock color. So I thought when I did this grouping, I had in mind that if I did a white wax first and then this antiquing wax, this brown antiquing wax from Waverly on top with a wet down rag, that maybe I could get a little bit more of that crockery look that I'm looking for. So since I have this terracotta pot, I thought this is my tester piece to see if it works out or not. So I let that white wax dry, and then now I'm going in with this wet wipe and some of this antiquing wax. I know I could probably have used the wet down version, but I was afraid that it would be too wet, that it would remove some of this chalk paint off of that. So I am testing this out to see if I can get one step closer to crockery. Working my way around the container, applying it with that watered down, that wet wipe with some of the antiquing wax, and then I am taking a little bit of a dry piece of drop cloth to blend it all in. But oh my gosh, I am absolutely loving the color of this. If you follow my channel and my thrift hauls, you know that I am a crock fan. I absolutely am obsessed with old crocks. So to be able to come close to achieving the color on some of these thrift flipped items is just a blessing, because I love doing the stamping on it, but I have a hard time when it comes to stamping on old crocks. I can kind of tell what a newer made crock is, but to achieve this color and to be able to stamp on it for some little decor pieces, oh my heart. So here's a side by side, just the white wax and the white wax with a little bit of the antiquing on top of it. So since I loved my test piece, that was a nice way to throw that free terracotta pot that I had in my hoard. I wasn't going to be out anything if it did not work. So now I'm going on to all the other items that I had mineral painted with the texture paint, put that white wax on, and going in and doing that same technique of that watered down wet wipe and then wiping it off to achieve the color that I'm looking for. But this is just a fun process for me. I don't know if you all enjoy watching me do it, but I am definitely enjoying doing this. Oh, what to do. It seems like every thrifted item group always has a problem child, and it's going to be my cookie jar here. So what to do? I could hand paint those letters, but this is a ceramic and I don't have a steady hand. It would just look like it would be a hot mess. So I actually have this black wax from Jolie that I ordered off of Amazon. So I'm going to go in, I wash that same brush out yet again, and I'm going in and trying to give a little bit of texture, but I ended up having to black wax the entire piece. And as I'm doing it, I'm going, well, I could have just cement colored painted this. So I'm going to go through and do this to the whole jar. After getting that cookie jar all black wax, I just was not in love with it. So I ended up putting the white wax on top of the black wax. Why not keep doing an item till you love it? And actually, after I putting the white wax on, it toned down that just enough. Yep, it gave it a cement look. Who knew? So now I'm going back in and making sure, just giving that white wax, blending everything together. See how the texture of the paint, it's because the way that this was glazed when it was a ceramic piece made that wax go on just a harsh texture. But putting this white wax on top of that kind of toned that down a little bit. Now I have my grouping that I brought back in my house, and this is where I'm going to do some stamping on these items. But I absolutely love the color and how these turned out. I thought it would be fun to do some side-to-side comparison of what the paint job that I did to compared to some of my crockery I have laying around my house. But see what I mean? That just gave it one more step towards a crockery color. When I actually thrifted this piece, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with this piece. And this is a Tim Holtz stamp set from scrapbook.com. I absolutely love the little animals. And I love that it has that receipt pad on the back of it. So for the back of this, it actually, God wink moment, this little receipt pad fit exactly in that space provided. So for a background, before I stamp on animals, I'm going to be in the background putting the stamp of the receipt just ever so lightly. I didn't heavily ink it because I just wanted it to be a background feature. So when it comes to my viewers' comments, I like to try some of the things that they tell me to do to achieve things. So I gauged out what 3 animals would fit perfectly on this space. I had people say that I could use paint to get that color to be a little bit more popish. So I'm just going in with the apple barrel paint and just using a sponge dabber to paint on some paint on this little cow. So trying to center it using that stamping block definitely helps. And so I'm just getting it centered and then pressing down hard, making sure that I get my impression. Okay, so the apple barrel paint did not work. Maybe if I would have had the chalk paint, but that's out in the workshop. So I'm just going to try again using the ink that stays on ink. That's okay, I like to try. And maybe I'll try again using some different type of paint. So if you're wondering why I chose the sheep over the pig, it was just what was pleasing to my eye for filling in that surface area. So it was easier to put them on the stamp block this way. I could see through it. I could press down on that hard. I put a lot of ink on there and then pressed really hard to get that impression. So I'm going to be using some wordage that comes with this same stamp pad. This is just a simple crock. I did not paint on this crock. I already liked this crock. And I'm going to try the technique where a lot of people told me because it's hard to stamp on the round objects. So a lot of people told me if I rolled it on that I could get the impression. So this is my next seeing, does this work for me or not? And my thought is it did work, but then it didn't work. It's kind of smudgy. Could be because it's a shiny surface or because that the stamp pad is a little bit foamy and bouncy. So I'm rubbing alcohol to the rescue on a cotton ball to remove that stays on ink before it dries. Now for this crock, the alcohol did not remove all of the ink, but that was okay because I'm still going to be stamping in the same area, just be a little bit of a shadow. So all I'm doing is going ahead and stamping on that, just pressing it in, trying to hold that stamp center. And nope, I didn't get a clean, but it's a little bit better than being words I can't read. My original plan for this terracotta pot was to put it inside this canvas sack, but the colors do not go together. To me, anyway, they do not go together. So I am going to actually be stamping on this and just have an extra piece to sell. So I'd ordered these leaf stamp set again off of Amazon. There's just so many stamp sets out there. I'm just so addicted to looking at them and finding some to do. So I'm just doing this simple fern leaf. I love ferns. I don't know about you guys, but I just thought, how about a simple fern leaf on this just nice, simple terracotta pot? So now I'm going to go in with this alphabet, this lowercase alphabet that came in the set that had the uppercase, the numbers, and the lowercase off of Amazon. And I'm just going to go in and go in with just to make that fern. And I would have put these on a vellum piece so I could hold them, but because I had done that air dry clay, I hadn't washed them yet and they wouldn't stick to it. So I'm going in one by one and putting these letters on. So they may not be perfectly straight, but it's going to be that imperfectly perfect of a thrift lift item. For this little jug, since I didn't have a maple leaf to make it a maple syrup jug, or I didn't have any kind of a whiskey stamp to make it a whiskey bottle jug, I'm actually just using this pure dairy cream from the IOD crockery stamps to stamp on the top of it. And I did just stick it on a piece of this vellum that came off some other of the stamps to attach it, which is probably similar to that one that you can get from the IOD that I had not ordered when I ordered stamps. But I just can't get myself just to order something for $2.50 to pay more for shipping and handling. So it did work, and I did have to touch it up, but it works. How many out there are just addicted to stamping? I have myself looking at way too many websites looking for stamps. So I'm going in with this number 2, just something simple on this one. And as you see, oh, if you could have heard me swear when my my letter O dropped, darn it all, but it is what it is. I'm just going with that perfectly imperfect. It's okay. So now for this little crock, I have decided that I'm not going to use a bigger leaf. I'm kind of going to do the same thing that I did with that receipt pad and the 3 animals on top of each other and with a number. So I'm going to lightly stamp this leaf on. I didn't put a ton of ink on it. I've got it on that piece of vellum again so that I can hold it down and then just so slowly move my hands over so I can try to get all that impression. I can't say this is the easiest thing to do to stamp around objects, but it is achievable, and it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of patience, but I do love how it turned out. And no, I did not want that impression to be dark and crisp, because now I want to put this letter 3 on top of that, and I want the letter 3 to be darker than what that leaf was. So now I'm going to put a couple coats of this Krylon acrylic spray on all of the areas where I stamp seal that stays on ink in there. And then I want to make sure that my paint on these items, especially since some of these are kitchen items, will be good and sealed in. So this is the reason that I matched these 3 books the way that I matched them up. I had got this decoupage paper yet again off of Amazon. I'm still amazed what you can find on Amazon. This is some Tin Holtz little black and white, just right up my alley, black and white decoupage paper. It is almost like a rice paper. It's so thin, but look how pretty those patterns are. So I decided to go grab 3 very large rubber bands that I had in my hoard to make sure that these books don't shift while I am putting that decoupage paper on. So this is really just a really straightforward craft. I just eyeball what pattern I think. I think every piece of this paper is beautiful. I cut around what is pleasing to my eye. There's wording on this paper also, so that's why I have a little bit of overhang. If you don't want to have any waste, you can tidy it right up to that corner. So now I just poured out some Mod Podge on a paper plate using a foam applicator and just giving a nice, not overly so it's dripping in between the books, but just a nice coating. So now I'm just taking that decoupage paper and then just laying it where the design pattern that I have chose. And now I'm going it over after I smooth it out with my fingers a little bit and then going over it with some more Mod Podge. Taking the tip of that applicator brush and then pushing it in between the 2 books to give myself a little bit of that paper going in. So when I go in with my Cricut very sharp X-Acto knife and cutting this paper while it is wet, you definitely want a very sharp X-Acto knife if you're choosing to cut it while it's wet, but I want that paper to be glued down over each book. Make sure that those ends are in there and over the edges of those books, just taking the applicator again and pushing it down. And then I'm going to repeat the same process using that cutoff piece that I had not used yet, just kind of centering it where I think it is pleasing to my eye, with there being lettering and words and the leaf pattern, putting that Mod Podge on ever so lightly, not too heavy that it's running in between the books, running that tip down to make sure there's not too much piled up in between the books. This paper is very nice. It's thin, but it is very sturdy. I don't feel like it's going to rip as I'm moving it around and straightening out any wrinkles before applying another coat of the Mod Podge on it. Using that sharp X-Acto knife to cut in between the pages and around the excess on the edges. And then one more swipe across, making sure that it is tucked in around the edges of the books and making sure that it's nice and secure. Now, since I don't think anybody wants to buy these with a blue rubber band on them, I'm going to change this out to some of this I just thrifted this whole ball of hemp rope, so why not use it? I could have used jute, but I just now have this, so I'm just going to wrap it around 4 or 5 times and just tied a nice little knot on the top to make these books all stay together. So now I needed to come up with something else to fill up this canvas little sack. So I just have some Dollar Tree fuller foam, some Spanish moss that I had thrifted, and then I actually got these on a really good deal at Michael's. They ended up being $1 something a piece for whatever the sale was that I was blessed to run across. I liked the greenery of them. I didn't like that really green stem, but I think the way that I'm pushing these down, and it is wired enough that I can separate the grass to cover that up. It's not wired enough that I can cut them apart, but I think it will accent this little canvas basket just nice. So I'm just taking the tag off, sticking them into that fluorofoam so that it's not going to move, fanning them out. There's enough wire on there that I can fan them and make them a little bit fuller. I definitely like this pop of greenery with that coffee stain of the canvas. This is a quick little project. I have these little they're for knobs. I got them off of scrapbook.com, that redesign line. I absolutely love the little farmhouse video, and they had the bees. I am still so obsessed with bees. But when it came to this little jars like this always sell really well for me. I don't need to do anything to it, but I couldn't help myself. This jar has that honeycomb look to it. I guess you'd call it chicken wire too, but I see honeycomb. So I'm just adding one of these little transfers, and this transfer just stuck so quickly onto this. I know it's not something that you're necessarily going to stick out in your face and see, but I just couldn't help myself. So transfers do need to be sealed in, so I'm just going to get a little squirt of it on that little transfer and wipe off the excess off the glass. So I thank you so much for watching today's video, and what was your favorite? And did we inspire you in any way to look at thrift store finds in a new way? I thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you are part of our YouTube family, thank you so much. And if you're new to our channel and checking out the content for the first time, please consider hitting that subscription button along with the notification bell. Thanks again for watching.